This podcast represents a brief history of the law relating to the issues raised. This should not be relied on as a substitute for professional advice. Specific legal advice should always be sought in relation to any particular circumstances, and no liability will be accepted for any losses incurred as a result of reliance on this podcast by those relying solely on this podcast. Welcome now to Hicksons Health Hour, the podcast series that explores a variety of current legal health topics. Throughout each episode, hear from different members of our health team with expertise in the area.
My name is Meesha McLeod and I'm a special counsel on the health team.
And my name's Krishna Nand and I'm an associate in the health team.
Today we'll be discussing the class action accusing Exactech of supplying faulty joint implants and the impact of class actions on the industry. So Krishna, first and foremost, who are Exactech?
Right, thank you, Meesha. So Exactech is an American company. It was incorporated by two prominent orthopedic surgeons, that being Doctors Bill Petty and Gary Miller. So they essentially specialize in manufacturing joint replacement implants, as well as other surgical instruments and technologies that are really pertinent in orthopedic surgery. And their main purpose has been to assist patients from mobility issues, be it the hips or the knees, which is something we'll be talking about today. The company does have a strong international presence. It's got distribution in over 30 countries, including our homeland of Australia, and it's based in Florida in the United States. So that's pretty much an introduction to who Exactech are.
And for those of us who aren't familiar with the concept of a class action, can you briefly explain what that involves?
Right, so it's a good question, Meesha. Thank you very much. So a class action is basically a massive legal case where there's more than one plaintiff, that is a party commencing a claim against a particular person or even a group of other people, which that also includes a company in our case. And these group members of plaintiffs, they typically allege the same injuries that have happened to them, such that the injuries that are alleged to have been sustained are common amongst all the group members.
Thanks, Krishna. So in this matter that we're discussing today, a class action was launched in September this year. Can you give us a bit of background as to how the proceedings came about?
Certainly. So there was a former patient who was the primary applicant, and that's Mr. Simon Harold. Mr. Harold went through a surgical procedure around March 2019, and he essentially went for a knee implant, and that knee implant happened to be manufactured by Exactech. He was 52 years old at the time, and just very recently, say October of last year, he started to report symptoms of knee swelling, and he also started experiencing what we'd call clunks. So whenever he would move in his knee, he could just hear some sounds, and that was kind of like a very uncomfortable thing for him to feel. So what happened because of this, he decided to go through another surgical round to, in fact, replace that knee implant that was supplied by Exactech. And despite the second round of surgery, Mr. Harold actually says that he still continues to have pain, as well as some sort of intermittent swellings around his knee area. And this has caused a bit of blood and other pathology-related issues around his knees as well.
So if we're looking at the greater class, essentially, what are they all alleging went wrong?
Right. This is an interesting one because there's kind of a bit of science involved here, but try and keep it simple as possible. So basically, these knee implants by Exactech, they're made of polyethylene, which is like a plastic material. So what happened was that when these implants were placed in their relevant packaging, that turned out to be, or at least what's alleged, is that there were defects in the packaging. So that actually caused the surrounding oxygen to sort of integrate with those knee implants. And what happens is that when we have a polyethylene chain reaction with oxygen, it actually causes the compounds in the polyethylene to break down. So this material went inside not only Mr. Harold's body, but it's been alleged that it went through other plaintiffs as well. And they're alleging further injuries because of this, I guess, what you'd call oxidized product being placed in your body. So that's injuries like chronic inflammation, tissue and bone necrosis, which is the death of the cells around those areas, and pain and other severe mobility issues. And just really the allegation when it comes to liability around the defective packaging, all of these plaintiffs are saying that the thermal processes that had sealed the components of these polyethylene-based implants, they weren't actually done in the expectations that's pertinent for this particular industry. So basically, the early exposure that you had to the oxygen before the surgical procedures, that in fact caused with a greater degradation of the product.
So if we delve for a moment further into this concept of oxidation reaction, can you just explain a bit more the dangers that this presents to the individuals involved?
Certainly. So I guess just starting with the context. So with these knee replacements, so basically what happens is that the surgical team places a tibial insert inside the cushion of the knee, and this replacement, of course, it's placed into the cushion, which is made of plastic, and this actually helps patients to walk because it helps the patients to cope up with the pressures of weight in their already impaired knee. So with these plastic pieces that mostly comprise of polyethylene, they would be stored in a bag during the process of supply, and that essentially allowed air to come into the bag. And with time during the supply process, the chemical reaction would slowly break down the compounds inside the polyethylene implants, which, and then, this material going inside the body in the context of, being inserted inside you surgically, it's not very sustainable, and it can be highly dangerous. So then guess what happens afterwards is that the plastic components of the tibial insert that I talked about earlier, it has the potential to spread and degrade, well, either on the shelf, depending on how long it's placed before the surgery, and should it go inside the body, it can cause damages to the surrounding bones and ligaments, which is what's medically called osteonecrosis. That is the death of the bones, putting it very simple. So, if the plastics were to spread further inside the body, we're talking about more complications to other organs and potentially the surrounding blood cells.
So if we come back to looking at this case more through a legal lens, what do you say are the implications it may have on health practitioners beyond the global recall that we've seen? And what other issues do you see the case as highlighting?
Right. I guess what's very significant here is it's very impactful on how we classify regulation, because just out of summary, under the therapeutic goods regulation, anything that's inserted inside a patient's body by surgery is considered class 3, which can be highly dangerous. So this will raise a lot of questions from both a commercial perspective, because essentially we're dealing with a manufacturer and a supplier issue here. And that, of course, causes sort of like an earthquake disruption on the surrounding healthcare regulation here in Australia. At least in this current stage, it's a very early stage of the class action. The matter does highlight to health professionals that deal in similar areas, particularly dentistry, which has a lot of these kinds of implantations. I guess it would be wise for them to conduct, to some extent, research into background information of the materials, And, again, because it is really early stages, we still don't even have any sort of defensive arguments because the first case management hearing was only held on the 11th of October of the last month, really. And that just set out the entire timetable. But of course, even though there's still premature developments, I guess what remains to be seen is whether this class action will have an important bearing on assessing standard of care required for practicing health professionals in this area. Of course, we come across with the Section 50 professional standard of care defences all the time. So I suspect that this case will set quite a large precedent, especially when you would argue that defence in this particular context. But yeah, it should be an interesting case, and we really look forward to seeing where it goes.
Yeah, thanks, Krishna. We'll definitely be tracking the developments of this matter, and we'll provide an update in future episode once more information is to hand.